A cop dangled a black baby's toy in the snow as a joke, but when the father gave one quiet command, his trained K-9 delivered a punchline the officer never forgot. Snow blew sideways in gusts, rattling loose ice across the pavement as Darian Cole stepped out of the station's main corridor and into the blinding white of the Winterford Station parking lot. His arms were locked around his 8-month-old son, Cairo, wrapped in a thick navy blanket with uneven hand stitching, the last gift his father made before passing. The baby's face was buried gently against Darian's chest, nose peeking out just enough to breathe the frozen air, and every few seconds Darian would check to make sure the blanket hadn't slipped. He didn't stop walking, didn't hesitate, but his awareness was sharpened. Something was wrong. Darian felt it, not in a loud way but like a quiet shift in air pressure, a wrongness that traveled through his boots, into his spine. His eyes, dark and focused, flicked to the right just as a figure moved near the entrance of the building, Officer Brent Hallen. The man stood under the flickering security lights, adjusting his black gloves and pulling them tighter, though he didn't seem cold. His eyes weren't scanning the area like a real officer should. They were locked on Darian and the infant. Darian turned his head away immediately, pretending not to notice. He kept his pace steady, boots crunching snow with every step, but his mind was already calculating. Brent's presence wasn't coincidence. Darian had seen that type of stare before, less about safety, more about control. There were plenty of officers in Winterford Station, but Brent had a reputation. Power games dressed as protocol, cruelty dressed as humor. To Darian's left, moving in rhythm with his steps, padded the retired K-9, Rocco. The dog's presence was quiet but powerful, his gait smooth and disciplined. His nose twitched toward the air once, then again. Rocco didn't bark, didn't raise alarm, but his tail lowered a notch and his ears subtly flattened, alerting Darian in the way only a trained companion could. A sharp voice echoed over the intercom above them. "Attention passengers. Please avoid the east platform. Severe ice buildup reported. Maintenance underway." Darian didn't break stride. He had one goal: get Cairo home before the storm worsened. But every instinct told him that the true storm wasn't falling from the sky. As he approached the parking structure's edge, the rhythm of his steps faltered. He caught movement from the corner of his eye again. Brent was walking toward him now, deliberately. There were no passengers nearby. The area was mostly cleared out due to the weather warning. And yet, here came Brent, hands swinging too casually, mouth pulled into a crooked grin. "Cold day for a baby," Brent called out. Darian didn't stop walking. "We're fine, officer." Brent quickened his pace to match them, stepping just close enough to make Darian slow down, then cut slightly into his path. "I just wanted to check the baby's coat," Brent said, voice flat but laced with a mock concern that didn't match his eyes. "We're fine," Darian repeated, firmer now, adjusting his grip on Cairo. Brent tilted his head. "You sure he's not overheating in there?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly as he leaned closer. Too close. You know, in this kind of weather, people don't always think straight. Darian stopped. Rocco halted too, his paw planting down firmly. The wind gusted between them, and Cairo whimpered faintly against Darian's chest. "You don't need to inspect anything," Darian said. His voice was measured, respectful, but steel laced its edges. "We're heading home." Brent chuckled lowly, shifting his weight like he was stretching boredom out of his legs. "Relax, I'm just doing my job." Darian noticed Brent's hand twitch slightly like he was preparing to reach, either for the baby or something worse. Rocco's muscles tensed almost imperceptibly, his breathing shortening as if preparing for a cue. Darian stepped slightly left to move around Brent, but the officer mirrored him, casual in posture but pointed in placement. He wasn't here for safety. He was here for reaction. "Some folks don't know how to handle winter safety with babies," Brent said, voice low now, laced with something unkind. "Seen a lot of dads try to act brave. Doesn't always end well." The wind howled louder, tossing a sheet of snow sideways, breaking visibility for a second. Darian pulled Cairo closer, shielding his face, and took a deep breath. He wasn't just dealing with a rude officer anymore. Something about the way Brent lingered, how his words sounded rehearsed, baited, told Darian this wasn't about policy. It was about power. And Brent wanted a moment, a crack in Darian's calm. "You've made your observation," Darian said quietly. "Let us pass." But Brent only grinned wider and leaned just a fraction closer, his eyes flicking between Cairo and Darian. "You look nervous," he said. "That a guilty conscience, or just tired of carrying a burden you don't understand?" The insult was subtle, but it pierced deep. Darian's jaw tightened, but he refused to rise. Instead, he glanced down at Rocco, who had inched closer, his frame now perfectly positioned between Brent's body and Cairo's tiny feet. The snow thickened, swirling again in sudden gusts, turning the world white and blinding. Darian stood perfectly still, letting the wind pass, his breath short and even. He could feel his heart thumping against Cairo's back. Then Brent leaned in, barely a whisper. "Maybe I'll just hold the baby for a second." "Make sure he's okay." Rocco growled. It was low and steady, not a threat, a warning. Brent stepped back half an inch, surprised. "Call off your dog," he snapped, his fake calm fracturing for the first time. Darian stared at him. Quiet. "He's not attacking," he said. "He's reading the situation." Brent smirked again, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of unease now forming. The smirk faltered just enough for Darian to see it, and he knew then that Brent had underestimated everything. This wasn't going to end as easily as Brent had imagined. The weather wasn't the only thing growing colder, and the worst part was that Brent looked like he enjoyed the tension growing between them. Brent extended his arm suddenly, palm out, fingers twitching like a man giving a traffic command. "Let me hold the baby for inspection," he said flatly, his tone wrapped in artificial authority that had no place in reality. Darian froze. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. "Excuse me?" he asked, adjusting his grip on Cairo's bundled body. Feeling the baby shift with a soft, instinctive whimper, Brent took a step closer, boots crunching over hard ice. "I need to verify he's not overheated. You've got him all wrapped up," he added with a smirk. Darian instinctively shifted Cairo to his other arm, stepping back, angling his body slightly. "It's 30 degrees out here," he replied calmly. "He's fine." But Brent didn't move aside. In fact, he leaned in, closing the distance between them in a way that felt less like concern and more like challenge. Rocco, at Darian's side, tensed, not lunging, not barking yet, but shifting his weight forward. The signal was subtle, a low buzz of readiness under the surface. Brent leaned closer to Darian's ear, voice low and poisoned. "Some fathers just pretend to care, you know. Wrap them up, parade them around, doesn't mean they know what they're doing." Darian's breath caught in his chest. The insult wasn't about heat. It was about fatherhood, about judgment disguised as protocol. He steadied his voice. "Don't touch my son." Brent tilted his head and smiled, that smug, practiced expression of a man who thought he could spin anything into a misunderstanding. "Relax," he said. "You're being dramatic." Snow began to fall harder now, as if the sky itself bristled with tension. Around them, visibility shrank to a veil of white. A few passengers at a distance slowed their steps, heads turning, uncertain if they were witnessing a scene or a situation. Brent thrived in that gray space. He knew bystanders rarely stepped in when the lines were blurry. Darian's body stiffened as Brent's hand moved fast, too fast. The officer grabbed the edge of a Cairo's navy blanket and yanked. The motion jolted the baby, and Darian instinctively tightened his grip, but Brent's other hand came up like a pivot, twisting the bundle. In a single, horrifying second, Cairo slipped from Darian's grasp. "No!" Darian lunged forward, arms out, but Brent already had Cairo by the ankles, hoisting the baby upside down like a rag doll. Rocco barked, One explosive, echoing burst that slammed into the station walls and bounced back like thunder. But Darien, heart pounding like a war drum, snapped his hand down. The gesture was sharp, practiced, a command to hold. Rocco stopped mid-movement, body locked, eyes searing through Brent. "What are you doing?" Darien barked, voice cracking with both fury and terror. Brent laughed, actually laughed. "Just testing reflexes," he said, gently swinging the upside-down baby back and forth as if Cairo were a snow globe to be admired. "Winter humor," he added with a wink. Cairo screamed, shrill, panicked, raw. His arms flailed and his face twisted in terror. His legs shook in Brent's careless grip. Darien's breath caught, his body frozen in a storm of helplessness and calculation. One wrong move, one desperate grab, and Brent could drop Cairo. That possibility rooted Darien in place even as his blood begged him to act. "I said, put him down," Darien growled. "Ah, don't be like that," Brent said, voice laced with mockery. "You fathers get so sensitive. It's just a test, you know. See how he reacts." Bystanders were gathering now, drawn by the barking, by the baby's cries, by the wrongness of the scene. Some stood halfway between motion and hesitation, unsure of what they were witnessing. But Brent didn't notice. He was watching Darien, studying him, provoking him. Darien felt the cold not in the air, but in his spine. This wasn't a game. It was domination disguised as play. And Brent's grip didn't waver. He adjusted it, lifting Cairo slightly higher by the ankles and grinning wider, as if holding a trophy. The baby's blanket slid, exposing a tiny sock that fluttered like a flag in the wind. Cairo's sobs tore at Darien's chest. His fingers curled into fists. Rocco, inches from his side, vibrated with tension. The K-9 knew the posture Brent had taken. Darien had seen it in training drills years ago, the position that activated defense response in scenarios involving infant threats. But he couldn't act yet, not until he was sure Cairo wouldn't be harmed in the process. Brent chuckled again, giving Cairo a slight sway in the air. "Light, kid," he muttered. "You sure you didn't wrap a stuffed animal in there?" A gust of wind blew harder, swirling snow around them like smoke from a fuse just lit. The storm didn't care what was happening. It just kept getting worse. Darien swallowed, forcing calm into his bloodstream. Every instinct screamed to charge, but instinct wouldn't save Cairo. Precision would. He shifted his weight subtly, positioning his feet for stability. Rocco mirrored the movement. Brent turned slightly, raising Cairo higher still. "Maybe I'll see if he can make a snow angel." And that's when Darien's patience broke clean in half. His voice dropped to a whisper so low only Rocco could hear it. "Stand." The storm howled. The crowd gasped, and in that instant, Darien knew they had crossed an invisible line, and Cairo's terrified cry shattered whatever patience Darien had left. Brent lifted Cairo a few inches higher by the ankle, grinning as he said, "Let's see how good he is at making snow angels." His voice was light, amused, but the image was anything but playful. The infant's small frame dangled in the freezing air, arms flailing instinctively as he cried louder, his muffled whimpers no longer gentle but urgent. Darien's heart thundered, but his face remained still, too still. In that breathless moment, he stopped thinking like a victim and started calculating like a tactician. The angle of Brent's elbow, the grip around Cairo's ankle, the shifting wind and how it might affect visibility. The exact position of Rocco, who stood 5 feet behind Brent, legs firm, breath slow, eyes locked on the baby. Any sudden move now could cause Brent to flinch, to fumble, to let go. And Cairo, barely 8 months old, wouldn't survive a fall like that, not onto frozen concrete. Darien couldn't lunge. He couldn't shout. He couldn't break the balance of the moment. So instead, he turned to words, sharpening them like a blade. "You're really something," Darien said slowly, voice low but clear. "I mean..." The way you command authority? Impressive." His eyes didn't blink. His hands stayed by his sides. "I can see why they keep you on patrol." Brent's grin widened, misunderstanding the sarcasm. "Finally, someone appreciates the method," he chuckled, swinging Cairo just a bit to the side like a child might dangle a snow globe. "You panicked too early, friend. He's fine. Tough little guy." "He's light, too," Brent added, looking down at the child as if he were evaluating luggage. "You sure you're feeding him enough?" That last comment struck deep, but Darien didn't react. He forced himself to exhale through his nose, slow and steady. Behind Brent, Rocco didn't move except for a faint tremor in his front right leg, just enough for Darien to see. It was the signal. Ready. Snow began to swirl more fiercely around them, the wind pushing flurries in sudden chaotic spirals. A metal sign near the terminal entrance rattled from the gusts, creating a high, tinny clang. Darien's eyes flicked to it, then to Brent, then back to Rocco. "Hold still for a second," Darien said, casually lifting his foot and tapping the base of the sign with the heel of his boot. The clang echoed again, louder this time, ringing in the icy air. That sound, that precise pitch and reverberation. It was a part of Rocco's old training, specifically tied to urban defense drills. It meant, prepare to defend, not attack. Not move, just prepare. Brent didn't notice. He was laughing again, louder now, the wind carrying his voice in broken pieces. "I mean, look at him, screaming like I just dipped him in a snowbank." Cairo's cries rose, strained and desperate. His tiny fists trembled against the wind. Darien's jaw tightened. The tension in his chest felt like wires pulling tight beneath his skin. But still, he didn't break. He watched Brent's footing, watched the slight wobble in his left leg, noted how tightly his fingers clutched Cairo's ankle. And then Brent did something that made time seem to split. He jerked his arm back with a theatrical laugh, angling Cairo over a nearby snow pile, and said, "You ready for the snow angel test, little man?" Darien's breath seized Cairo, let out a piercing scream. Not the startled kind, but the fear-filled kind that shattered any illusion this was a joke. That sound sliced through the air like a lightning strike. Rocco's ears flattened. His eyes narrowed. It was time. Darien clenched his teeth, leaned forward slightly, and whispered just one word. "Stand." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a yell. It was a quiet, precise signal, one that bypassed noise and struck straight into Rocco's memory, where it meant only one thing. Prepare your force for a single, controlled, precision strike launch. The air seemed to still, the wind holding its breath as if the entire station froze in that instant. Brent was still chuckling. "Relax, it's just a—" He never finished the sentence, because what he didn't know, what no one had told him, was that the very posture he'd chosen to display power had aligned perfectly with a scenario drilled into Rocco's memory. Child suspended by the limb, high risk of injury, unstable stance by threat. Rocco's legs coiled, his body adjusted, quiet as a whisper. One breath, one twitch. One moment, Darien didn't flinch. He stood tall, watching Brent as if waiting to confirm what the storm already knew. And in that heartbeat, the storm outside finally matched the storm inside Darien. Brent shifted Cairo slightly in his grasp, raising the infant just a few inches higher into the wind, unaware that he had just sealed his fate. His gloved hands, rough and twitching with the thrill of control, dangled the baby as if he were nothing more than a prop in a cruel performance. The snowy wind whipped around them, tossing flakes into the narrow space between Brent's smirking face and Cairo's panicked cries. From a few feet away, Darien Cole's eyes didn't blink. His arms remained open, raised in slow surrender. But it was a decoy. Behind that calm exterior, every calculation had already been made. Rocco, the retired K9, pressed one paw slightly into the snow, adjusting his weight like a coiled spring. The motion was so subtle it might have been missed if anyone had dared to look down. The snow beneath him trembled just enough to signal readiness. Darian caught the movement. It was time. "You feel strong, holding a baby like that?" Darian asked, his voice sharp but measured, like a blade hidden in a velvet sheath. Brent barked a laugh, tilting Cairo higher for the recruits to see. "Just having a little fun. You're too sensitive," he sneered, flashing his teeth like he had already won. The recruits, positioned near the edge of the station platform, exchanged nervous glances but remained silent. Their confusion only fed Brent's arrogance. Darian's eyes narrowed slightly. The laughter, the mockery, it was all part of Brent's performance. But Brent didn't notice the deeper shift. He didn't notice the half-inch slip of his boot against the ice, the unbalanced angle of his stance, or the wind now battering sideways against the weaker side of his frame. Darian noticed. Every detail mattered now. Cairo's cry cut through the air, shrill, cold, terrified. The baby's cheeks had turned blotchy from the freezing wind, and tears streamed down the sides of his face, clinging to his eyelashes like tiny glass beads. That was the final thread. Darian exhaled slowly and whispered the one word Rocco had waited for. "Mark." To any bystander, it would have sounded like a breath, but to Rocco, it was gospel. Without a single bark, without a growl, the dog launched forward, not with rage, not with teeth, but with trained, silent precision. Snow burst into the air behind him like smoke from a cannon. His movement was a straight line, a blur of controlled muscle and years of discipline. Brent saw him a second too late. "What the—" he began, but he never finished. Rocco's shoulder collided with Brent's left knee with surgical accuracy. The force didn't break bone. It didn't need to. It bent Brent backward just enough to collapse the structure of his stance. His balance, already weakened by the slick ice, failed. His grip loosened. Cairo dropped, but not far. Darian had already surged forward, his knees burning from the sprint across the snow. He caught his son against his chest, wrapping both arms around him tightly. Cairo sobbed into the curve of his shoulder, clinging instinctively to the familiar scent and warmth of his father. Darian stumbled slightly on the landing but held firm. Anchoring them both in the snow, Brent hit the ground with a thud, arms flailing as he landed on his back, half swallowed by a drift. The recruits gasped audibly. One of them took an instinctive step forward, then paused, unsure of protocol. Rocco didn't return to Brent. He didn't gloat. He circled calmly back to Darian's side, positioning himself between father and officer, his body straight and proud. His breathing was slow, his expression unreadable. He didn't bare teeth. He didn't bark. He simply stood. Brent sat up, disoriented and stunned, snow in his collar and across his face. His eyes darted from Rocco to Darian to the baby now safely cradled in his father's arms. He opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. The smirk was gone. From the station's sliding doors, more passengers stared in stunned silence. No one moved. The wind howled louder for a moment, scattering the snow into spirals that danced around Brent's feet like ash around a fire. Darian rocked Cairo slowly, whispering words only his son could hear. His breath fogged against the baby's cheek, melting the cold away one whisper at a time. And then, just loud enough to be heard above the storm, Darian murmured to himself, voice steady, and Brent realized too late that the joke had never been on the baby. It had been on him. Brent lay stunned in the snow, blinking rapidly as shards of wind-bitten frost slapped his cheeks, unable to process how quickly his illusion of control had crumbled into public humiliation. The sky above was gray and churning, but it was the eyes around him, dozens of witnesses, still stunned, that weighed more heavily than the storm. Darian stood just feet away, cradling Cairo tightly against his chest, the infant's cries subsiding into soft, hiccuped sobs. Rocco positioned himself squarely between Darian and Brent, his posture still tense but controlled, a silent declaration that the child was no longer within reach. Brent pushed against the ice beneath him with both hands, boots slipping awkwardly as he scrambled to reclaim his stance, and whatever dignity he thought he still held, his voice cracked through the cold air, loud and desperate. "That dog attacked me. He was ordered. He was told to attack." His finger jabbed toward Darian, but the accusation fell flat. Darian, breath steaming with controlled fury, didn't flinch. "You lost your balance," he replied evenly, voice low but firm, a quiet refusal to be baited. He checked Cairo's breathing again, lips brushing the boy's head. "And my son almost paid for it." The crowd had begun to inch closer. Murmuring in growing disbelief, a man in a wool coat whispered, "I saw him. He just grabbed the baby." Another shook his head. That wasn't an accident. Then came the sharp shuffle of boots on snow. Decisive, fast, Lieutenant Jaron Voss, shift supervisor of Winterford Station, pushed through the forming circle. His presence landed with authority. Jaron was no stranger to on-site tension, but the image that greeted him was jarring. Brent on the ground, Rocco standing like a sentry, Darian shielding an infant, and a silence too thick for normal protocol. "What the hell happened here?" Jaron barked, eyes cutting across the scene. Brent shot up, shaking snow from his sleeves like shame could be dusted off. "I stopped a dangerous incident. The child slipped from his father's arms. I caught him before anything worse happened." Jaron turned his eyes slowly toward Darian, then the baby, then Rocco. The truth felt loud in the silence. "Is that true?" Jaron asked plainly. Darian didn't need theatrics. He simply met Jaron's gaze and said, "Ask anyone here what they saw. Or better yet, ask him." He nodded toward Brent. Jaron's brow twitched. Why was the baby upside down? The question hit harder than any accusation. The recruit standing nearby shifted uncomfortably. Brent opened his mouth, then paused. For a second, his lips fumbled soundlessly. "It was reflex testing. Standard safety. Reflex protocol," he muttered, eyes darting for an exit in logic that wasn't there. "No such thing exists," Jaron said, voice cool as steel. His words silenced even the wind. A soft growl broke the moment. Rocco, ears perked and eyes alert, watching Brent with the calm of a creature who knew exactly what justice felt like. Not aggressive, just aware. A low note of understanding. That the room had changed. Then a voice came from the crowd, a passenger who had watched everything unfold. He grabbed the baby like a joke, upside down, swung him in the air like he was showing off. Another stepped forward. The father never even touched the dog. The dog acted on instinct, on training. Brent's hands curled into fists. "They're exaggerating." "Are they?" Jaron's tone hardened, the glint in his eyes shifting from protocol to principle. "Because you've had 3 conduct reviews this month, Brent. All marked pending. You think I haven't noticed the reports?" That hit harder than the ice. Brent staggered in silence, his swagger deflating visibly in the wind. One of the younger recruits, a lanky man with uncertainty all over his face, stepped forward slowly. "Sir, I've seen Officer Hallen make these kinds of jokes before, with parents. Always says he's testing if they crack easy." He winced. Didn't feel right. Never did. Jaron nodded once, not surprised, but disappointed. The wind howled against the station awning above, a sound like metal scraping the sky, but no one moved. The air between them was colder than snow and thicker than the storm. Brent, suddenly aware of the widening circle of eyes and truth, flinched under its weight. He told the dog to do it. He gave some kind of silent command. He trained that thing. Darian looked down at Rocco, then up. "That thing saved your life, and my son's." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the weight of every father pushed too far. Brent stepped forward, half slipping again, hand raised to point, but Jaron held up his own. "Stop." One word. Final. A wall. Then came the sound Brent hated most. Not an argument, not a command, but footsteps. Multiple passengers now coming forward, forming a quiet wall behind Darian. One by one, they voiced what they had seen. No embellishment, no anger, just quiet clarity. Jaren turned back to Brent, jaw tight. You let go of your professionalism, and you forgot what happens when witnesses watch you try to rewrite the story in front of them. Brent's face crumpled, part rage, part panic, all cornered pride. Rocco exhaled softly, relaxing only when Cairo, now calmed, reached a tiny hand toward his ear, brushing it gently. The dog tilted his head slightly in acknowledgement, never looking away from Brent. The moment was no longer about recovery, it was about reckoning, and for the first time, Brent understood that the storm he mocked was now sweeping straight toward him. Brent lunged forward without warning, his boots grinding into the packed snow as he reached not for Cairo this time, but for Rocco's leash. Darian's instincts flared. He shifted his body, angling slightly to shield Cairo, whose small whimper pierced the swirling silence around them. Rocco didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply turned his head, tracking Brent's movement with eyes that had seen worse storms than this. Trained storms, battlefield storms. The kind of storms Brent could never imagine. But Brent wasn't thinking about consequences. His pride had been bruised, twice, and he wanted to reclaim power. In his mind, if he couldn't dominate the father, maybe he could dominate the dog. He grabbed the leash roughly, yanking it like it belonged to him. "This animal is under investigation," Brent announced, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "He assaulted a uniformed officer." Jaren froze. His voice, calm yet cutting, slid through the air. "Let go of that leash, Brent. Right now." Brent ignored him. His grip tightened, but Rocco, unfazed, took a single step sideways. That's all it took. Brent's boot skidded on a slick patch of slush hidden beneath the surface snow. His balance, already compromised by his wounded ego, failed him. With a stunned grunt, he fell sideways, straight into a pile of wet snow that slapped across his face and uniform like nature itself had intervened. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. One man stifled a laugh. Another covered his mouth with his scarf. Even the recruits, still stiff with shock, turned their heads away to hide their reactions. Brent sat up slowly, snow dripping from his eyebrows, jaw clenched, eyes burning not just with embarrassment now, but with rage. Darian didn't move. He stood motionless. Cairo tucked securely against his chest, the infant's breathing finally beginning to steady. The baby's tiny hand curled into Darian's collar as if sensing that the father he clung to was the one fixed point in this swirling chaos. Rocco didn't flinch. He stood tall, snow peppering his back, posture still and regal like a monument in a blizzard. "You're done," Jaren said quietly, stepping forward until he stood between Brent and the others. His voice didn't need to rise. Authority wrapped itself around every syllable. "That's a protected Guardian Unit K9 under county statute. You touch him again, and you'll be explaining your badge to Internal Affairs by sundown." Brent blinked, stunned. "He attacked me." "He sidestepped," Jaren corrected, his tone now razor sharp. "And you slipped. No contact. Every camera on this platform will prove it." Brent looked around, but the support he expected had evaporated. The two recruits, Lane and Travers, stood near the edge of the platform, their eyes fixed on the ground. They didn't even pretend to back him. Darian watched it unfold in silence, but he was far from calm. Inside, a slow burn coiled around his ribs, not from hatred, but from clarity. Brent wasn't just a man with poor judgment, he was a man who escalated his failures. He didn't stop when he was warned. He didn't back down when someone was hurt. And worse, he was now actively trying to flip the narrative into one where Darian was the villain. Cairo's small cry bubbled up again, sharp, frightened, high-pitched. Rocco turned toward the sound and gently touched his nose to the baby's hand, a tender, practiced gesture that Darian had seen countless times during their years of service together. The baby calmed instantly, his breath hitching as warmth returned. "I'm filing a report," Brent spat, his voice wobbling between fury and desperation. "He ordered the dog to strike me. That's assault through animal force. "You're welcome to file whatever you want," Jaren replied without blinking. "But I'll be filing mine too, starting with attempted seizure of protected service property without cause." Brent staggered to his feet, snow falling from his jacket like broken pride. "You're siding with him? Over me?" "I'm siding with the law," Jaren replied, "something you clearly stopped following 10 minutes ago." The storm around them picked up again, snow hissing against metal and fabric, the sky above now a whirling gray of wind and unresolved tension. But inside Darian's chest, something had shifted. He no longer feared Brent. He no longer doubted his own restraint. Brent's glare traveled from Jaren to Rocco to Darian. That stare was no longer just annoyed, it was calculating cold. The kind of look that didn't accept defeat, but schemed around it. Darian recognized it immediately. He'd seen that look before, in corrupt officials, in men who valued pride over people. The danger wasn't over. It had only changed form. Rocco remained poised, completely still, but Darian felt the tension humming beneath the dog's ribs, a warrior resting, not retreating. Jaren, noting the building silence, raised his voice to the nearby crowd. "All witnesses, please remain nearby for documentation. This incident will be formally logged and reviewed." Brent scoffed and turned his back, fists clenched at his sides. Snow clung to the back of his collar like a weight he couldn't shake. Darian leaned his head close to Cairo's. The baby had fallen quiet again, his breath warm against Darian's coat. But the father's eyes never left Brent's silhouette as the officer stomped toward the station corridor. And deep inside Brent's glare, Darian saw that this was far from over. Brent demanded to file a report accusing Darian of assault through animal force. The accusation hit the air like a cold slap, sharp, absurd, and immediately disbelieved. A hush followed his words. One of the recruits, barely 20, shifted uncomfortably beside the wall, while the older of the two raised an eyebrow, exchanging a sideways glance of disbelief. Even the falling snow outside the corridor windows seemed to pause for a breath. Jaren Voss, standing at the center of the hallway, didn't blink. "Everyone inside," he said calmly but with a tone that allowed no room for question. "Storm's escalating. We'll settle this where the wind doesn't drown out the facts." Darian didn't speak. He just adjusted the blanket around Cairo's tiny head and stepped into the corridor with deliberate control. Cairo let out a small, confused murmur, his face red from the cold, his eyes blinking fast as they adjusted to the fluorescent glow inside. Rocco followed close behind, his stride matching Darian's perfectly. Paws silent against the tile, his fur now dusted with frost like powdered sugar over armor. Inside, the corridor lights flickered from the storm's interference, throwing elongated shadows that danced across the walls and floor. Jaren moved with clear direction, separating everyone with a few firm gestures. "Witnesses on this side. Officer Hallen, you stay there." Brent, still flushed from both the cold and humiliation, tried to raise his voice again. "You're letting him walk in here like a hero?" he said, motioning toward Darian and Rocco. "That animal should be leashed to a wall." "Lower your voice," Jaren snapped without turning. The authority in his tone silenced even the wind clawing at the corridor doors. The witnesses gathered along one wall, 4 passengers, a teenage boy who had recorded part of the incident, and the 2 recruits. Darian stood at the far end, rocking Cairo gently, trying to ease the baby's restless breathing. Rocco sat at Darian's side like a statue carved from patience and discipline, his amber eyes flicking between Brent and Jaren, calm but alert. "I'll take statements in order," Jaren announced. "You speak what you saw. No exaggerations, no conclusions, just facts." The first man stepped forward, middle-aged with snow still melting in his collar. "I saw that officer Hallen pull the baby out of the man's arms, upside down. He was laughing, said it was a test." Jaren nodded. "And did the dog act before or after that moment?" "After," the man said quickly. "Didn't lunge, didn't bite, just stepped forward. That's it." One by one, the passengers echoed the same sequence. Upside down baby. No provocation from the dog witness after witness layered on what Darian already knew, but hearing it spoken aloud, lined up like bricks of truth, grounded him. Brent's version of the story crumbled with every new voice. Darian's heart beat faster, not from fear now, but from the weight of collective validation. When Jaren finally turned to him, Darian stepped forward slowly. Cairo nestled against his chest, small fingers curled around the collar of his coat. "I didn't say anything when he first approached," Darian began, his voice steady, every word chosen with intent. "He insisted on inspecting my child for overheating. It was snowing. Freezing, actually. I declined. He then grabbed the baby's blanket and pulled. I still didn't react. I only moved Rocco into standby position when he ripped Cairo from my arms and dangled him upside down." He paused, letting the image settle into every listener's mind. "My dog was trained for high-risk child protection," he continued. "He didn't attack. He didn't touch Brent. He stood ready. When Brent slipped, after lifting Cairo even higher, Rocco executed a precise mark move. No contact with the baby, only enough to neutralize the situation." Brent scoffed. "You're making it sound like a documentary. That dog's unpredictable. It's still a weapon." Jaren's eyes narrowed. "That dog," he said slowly, "is Ridgefall Command certified. I've reviewed the files. No incidents. Not even during active duty. Trained across 17 scenarios, including hostage simulation, infant rescue, and impulse de-escalation. You should have known that." Brent looked like the wind had been knocked from his chest. "And as for unpredictable," Jaren stepped closer, lowering his voice, "you're the one on record for unsanctioned tests and jokes that border misconduct. You might want to choose your next words carefully." Brent opened his mouth, then shut it again. One of the recruits, his nerves clearly shaken, leaned toward the other and whispered something that carried across the corridor louder than he intended. "Didn't they say Internal was already looking into him?" Jaren turned toward them. "Repeat that." The younger man froze. I just heard from Sergeant Loran last week. They've been reviewing some of Officer Hallen's prior conduct, several flagged incidents." He looked down. "I didn't mean to." "No," Jaren said, holding up a hand. "It's important." Brent looked utterly thrown. His posture collapsed slightly as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Snow struck the corridor windows again, harder now. Outside, the storm built its crescendo, but inside, something else grew, a turning tide. Brent's voice faltered when he finally tried to interject. "This is being twisted. I've served here longer than any of these people. You all think I was trying to hurt a baby?" "You held a baby upside down in a snowstorm," Jaren said flatly, "and you called it a joke." Cairo shifted in Darian's arms with a soft whimper, his small head pressing against his father's shoulder. Darian touched his back gently, letting the rhythm of his hand settle him again. Brent looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would take his side, but none did. The witnesses stood silent, the recruits unmoving, and Jaren's stance clear. Snow outside traced new patterns across the window, spiraling like etched frostwork, as if the storm itself watched from the other side. And Brent realized too late that every witness was a wall he could no longer climb. The footage started playing, and the room fell into absolute silence. No one spoke, no one moved. Every breath hung in the air, waiting. On the wall-mounted monitor, a shaky, snow-laced video feed filled the screen. Grainy at first, the view showed the icy expanse outside Winterford Station. The snowfall partially blurred the figures moving in the distance: Darian, Brent, and the small bundle that was Cairo. For a second, Brent's hopes flickered behind his smug expression, as if the weather might cloak the truth. He leaned against the far wall with folded arms, a crooked smirk lingering on his lips. But then Nolan Crest, the internal surveillance officer, tapped the screen. "Secondary angle, North Corridor cam," he announced flatly. The display shifted. Now, the footage came from a thermal lens, and despite the falling snow, 3 distinct forms glowed in crisp silhouette. Brent's figure was tall and erratic. Darian stood steady, slightly hunched, and the infant in his arms was a glowing patch of warmth pressed to his chest. The third figure, Rocco, remained perfectly still at Darian's side. The room tensed. Then it happened. Brent reached forward, grabbed at Darian's arms, and wrestled the child away. The screen showed him flipping Cairo upside down by the ankles, shaking him lightly as if the baby were a toy. A burst of thermal motion showed Cairo's body trembling as he cried. Brent's outline bounced as he laughed. No sound in the footage, but the body language said it all. Gasps rippled through the corridor. Jaren Voss, standing near the wall with his arms crossed, clenched his jaw. One of the younger recruits swallowed audibly. Darian stared at the screen, jaw tight, holding Cairo now, not just with love, but with fury barely contained. Rocco didn't react to the footage, but his body leaned subtly against Darian's leg. Sensing the rising tension in his handler's breath, Brent's smirk faded into a stiff grimace. That footage is unclear, he stammered, gesturing vaguely. Could be misinterpreted. Nolan turned his head sharply. Misinterpreted? His voice was calm, but the silence afterward hit like thunder. Let's continue. He tapped again. A few frames advanced, Brent raised Cairo higher, one leg visibly twitching as he postured for bystanders, though they had already backed away. Then, the crucial moment. Brent's right boot lifted. He shifted forward and slipped. But even before the fall, the footage showed no contact between Brent and Rocco. Nolan paused the video. Let the record show, he said clearly. Prior to the subject's fall, there was no contact initiated by the K9 unit. He pointed to the screen. Rocco's silhouette remains stationary until after the subject begins to fall. Brent's face turned gray. That camera, it's thermal. Those don't show context. Nolan didn't blink. Context is for reports. This is fact. The screen dimmed. The reality hung over them like the weight of snowfall pressing against the roof. Your statement claimed the dog knocked you down, Nolan continued, stepping closer to Brent now. This shows otherwise. You slipped of your own error while endangering an infant, period. Brent opened his mouth, but no words came. Jaren stepped forward, his voice low. You held a child upside down, in a snowstorm. For what? To prove something. Brent finally exploded, his voice cracking. It was a joke, a reflex test. It wasn't serious. Nolan folded his arms. You think danger is funny? Brent fell silent. Cairo stirred softly in Darian's arms, letting out a small, exhausted whimper. Darian gently rocked him, whispering, You're okay. His eyes never leaving Brent. His voice was calm, but his shoulders were stone, unmovable, solid, as if he'd aged years in the span of a morning. Anyone else want to reinterpret what we just saw? Nolan asked flatly. No one spoke, not even the recruits. Jaren exhaled sharply through his nose, rubbing the bridge of his nose before turning to Nolan. That's enough to proceed. I'll submit the recording to Internal Affairs within the hour. Brent took a step back, shoulders shaking with silent rage. Nolan watched him with the blank intensity of a man who had watched too many men fall apart trying to defend the indefensible. You gambled that no one would see the truth, he said, his voice cool. Turns out, the storm wasn't the thing hiding you. You were just that reckless. Brent shook his head weakly, murmuring to himself, but no one paid attention anymore. The storm outside howled as if on cue, wind slapping against the windows like an unseen hand delivering judgment. Rocco turned his head toward Brent slowly, his ears alert. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but his gaze said more than words could. A protector's gaze? A warning. Passengers who had remained behind stared at the monitor even after the footage faded to black. One older man whispered, Unbelievable. Shaking his head, Darian looked down at Cairo, who had drifted into an uneasy sleep against his chest. The baby's breath was warm, fragile, precious. He kissed his forehead once and whispered again, "You're safe now." The corridor was still, save for the storm outside and the quiet hum of the monitor powering down. Brent said nothing more. Even he understood that no argument could challenge the raw weight of truth captured frame by frame. Nolan closed the tablet case and locked it. "We'll submit the footage with annotations." "And Brent," Jaren added, his voice low but firm, "don't speak another word until you're with internal affairs. Every syllable from here on will be a nail." Brent didn't respond. Outside, snow continued to slam against the windows, but inside, the storm had already chosen its direction. And Brent finally saw that the truth was colder than any winter wind he had ever felt. Brent's defiance shattered the silence like a crack of lightning. "I'm not handing over anything," he snapped, his hand clenched tightly around his badge as if it were the last tether holding his pride together. The air in the corridor thickened, not with noise, but with the collective shift in posture from every man in the room. The footage still flickered faintly on the monitor behind them, frozen on the frame that exposed the truth. Brent, standing smugly, holding baby Cairo upside down in the snow. Jaren didn't flinch. "Officer Hallen," he said, voice controlled, "you are ordered to surrender your badge and weapon for immediate suspension pending internal review." His tone held the weight of authority, calm, unshakable, and final. Brent's chest rose and fell, the heat of his humiliation rising to his cheeks. "This is a setup," he spat, his eyes darting toward Darian as if seeking validation from anyone willing to believe the lie. "That footage is taken out of context." Darian didn't move. He adjusted Cairo's blanket gently, shielding his son from the rising tension. His heart pounded behind his composed exterior. He wasn't afraid of Brent, not anymore, but he was ready. Ready in case Brent lost control again. Nolan Crest stepped forward. The surveillance officer's presence carried a cold finality. Badge, weapon. "Now," he said evenly, as if reading from an internal law carved in stone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The way his eyes fixed on Brent was enough to make the recruits at the edges of the room shift uncomfortably. Brent stood still, jaw tightening. "This is political," he muttered. "You're all just—" "You are out of order," Jaren interrupted, steel creeping into his voice. "This is not up for debate." The wind howled against the corridor's frosted windows, rattling the glass like an impatient reminder that the world outside was still wild, and watching Brent's gaze flicked to the exit. He took one step toward it. Nolan blocked the path. The motion was clean, wordless. His body simply became an unmoving barrier. A standoff formed, one devoid of violence but heavy with consequence. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them, casting long, sharp shadows along the corridor floor. Brent looked from face to face, none of them on his side now. Even the recruits, who once looked up to him, shifted behind Nolan. Their expressions had changed. Where there had once been uncertainty, there was now quiet resolve. Brent's breath hitched. He glanced at Darian again, hoping to find weakness, maybe fear, but Darian just rocked Cairo gently, his eyes unreadable. The baby let out a soft hiccup. Tiny fists curled into his father's coat. Rocco stood between them and Brent, his posture protective but unthreatening, a silent line drawn in the snow and ice of memory. Brent's voice finally cracked. "I never meant harm," he said, a flicker of regret breaking through, but not enough. Jaren didn't blink. "You held a baby upside down. You laughed while doing it, and you escalated when you were told to stop. That footage, those witnesses, and your behavior violate every code of conduct in this department. You endangered an infant's life." The silence that followed was suffocating. Brent's fingers trembled as he reached up. Slowly, as if surrendering a piece of his identity, he unpinned the badge from his chest. It hung in his hand for a moment. Heavy, accusatory, Then, without ceremony, he dropped it into Nolan's outstretched palm. The badge hit Nolan's glove with a cold metallic clink. That sound echoed louder than any words that followed. It silenced Brent. It silenced the corridor. It even seemed to hush the wind against the windows. Behind them, snow began drifting down again. Not wild like earlier, but soft, slow, white curtains sliding across the frame of a scene that had finally played out. And with that small metallic clink, Brent's last illusion of control shattered completely. Brent was escorted to a holding office under temporary detainment, his protests muffled by the howling wind that rattled the corridor windows. As the door shut behind him, a strange hush fell over the station, a silence not of peace, but of aftershock. Darien finally allowed himself to breathe, a full inhale that shook through his chest as he tightened his arms around Cairo. The baby's small fists clutched the fabric of Darien's coat, his cheek pressed close, damp from tears but growing warmer with each breath. Rocco sat planted at Darien's side, his body still alert, though his gaze had softened, shoulders relaxed, ears flicking occasionally at the ambient noise. He was no longer a weapon, but a guardian once more. Lieutenant Jaron Voss stepped forward, his expression unreadable, though there was no doubt his authority had been tested and tempered by what he'd witnessed. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, his voice carrying both official tone and personal gravity. "On behalf of Winterford Station, I want to offer my sincere apology." Darien looked up, his eyes tired but steady. "Thank you," he replied, the words strained with fatigue. He wasn't angry at Jaron. The officer had acted with integrity, stepping in when it mattered, but the lingering echo of what could have happened still rang through Darien's bones. He gave a subtle nod, as if to say, "I appreciate it, but I won't forget." Jaron gave a respectful pause, then turned to speak with Nolan Crest, who had returned to the corridor with his tablet still in hand. Nolan, ever the technician, had replayed the footage twice since Brent was removed, ensuring every movement, every frame was catalogued precisely. He adjusted the screen's angle and whispered to one of the nearby staff, ensuring the recordings were preserved securely and immediately duplicated for the Oversight Committee. Meanwhile, the corridor, once a place of tension, began to regain its human shape. Passengers who had hovered anxiously now drifted slowly toward Darien and Rocco. Their steps were hesitant at first, as though unsure whether to offer sympathy or distance. A few placed gentle hands on Rocco's back, murmuring soft praise. "Good boy," or "That dog saved a life." Rocco accepted the attention with practiced calm, eyes always flicking back to Cairo. An older man stepped forward, hat in hand, his eyes wet with something deeper than mere witnessing. "I lost my son 15 years ago," he said to Darien, voice low, broken but composed, to a moment just like this, reckless hands, laughter that turned lethal. No one stepped in back then. He blinked. "Watching you fight for yours, it healed something I thought was long gone." The words hit Darien like a gust he hadn't braced for. He lowered his head, shielding Cairo from the man's tears, nodding in solemn solidarity. "I'm sorry you had to carry that," Darien said quietly. "No one should." The older man smiled faintly, then stepped back into the crowd, leaving a weight behind, one that Darien carried willingly. The storm outside had begun to soften, snow now falling in silent spirals, no longer slamming against the glass like before. It coated the windows in calm, muffling the wind's voice. The chaos had passed, but a strange quiet replaced it, as if the station itself had stopped to reflect. Jaron approached again, this time with practical news. "Medical team is on their way," he said. "Just precautionary. We want to make sure your son hasn't been exposed too long to the cold or shock." Darien nodded, brushing his hand gently over Cairo's head. The baby had finally calmed, his breath deep and even, the rise and fall of his tiny chest syncing with his father's heartbeat. His hand curled around Darien's collar, clinging not out of fear now, but comfort. Rocco shifted closer, nudging his head gently beneath Darian's elbow until he could rest his chin on the toe of Darian's boot. The dog didn't blink. He simply remained, a sentinel of stability. Still, the silence wasn't easy. In it, Darian's mind repeated every moment: Brent's laughter, the upside-down grip, Cairo's scream, the moment Darian had to choose restraint over rage. What would have happened if Rocco hadn't been trained for precision? If Brent had slipped a second earlier? If no one had recorded anything? The what-ifs clawed through his thoughts like frost on glass. Jaren, noticing the stillness stretching too long, spoke again. The station will launch a full investigation. I've already flagged the incident as a priority. You'll have full transparency, my word. Darian met his gaze. Not just for me, he said. For every father who might walk through that door next. Jaren nodded once, slowly. Understood. Across the corridor, Nolan clicked his tablet shut and gave a subtle nod to Jaren. Confirmation that the digital copies had been safely backed up and transferred to the proper chain. The facts were now beyond manipulation. Passengers began trickling out now that the emergency had been addressed. Some paused to look back, others simply walked on. But the mood had changed. There was no more confusion. No more excuses. Brent's actions had crossed a threshold no one could ignore. As Darian sat quietly, holding Cairo close and listening to the fading shuffle of departing feet, he felt a shift inside him. Not release, not peace, but something closer to weight finding its rightful place. The fear he had felt, raw and furious, was still there, but it had settled into resolve. Brent might be gone from the room, but the consequences of what had happened were still forming, like cracks beneath fresh snow. Rocco raised his head at the sound of new footsteps. The medical staff would arrive soon. The next phase was beginning, one filled not with adrenaline, but with decisions, protocols, and the long path toward change. Darian didn't yet know what his role would be and what came next, but he understood that the world had seen something today, something it couldn't unsee. And the weight of that truth was one he would carry forward, not as a burden, but as a reason. Rocco remained still, chin on his boot, eyes sharp yet at peace, and in that quiet shift, Darian realized the aftermath was only beginning. The heavy wooden doors of the Winterford Review Hall thudded shut behind Darian as he stepped inside, cradling Cairo tightly in his arms. The faint click of the latch was swallowed by silence. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reflecting off the polished tile floor in long, pale strips. The air was sterile, still, and tense, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Cairo, wrapped snugly in a clean blanket from medical staff, slept with his tiny face nestled into Darian's chest. At Darian's feet, Rocco lay in a tight curl, ears perked, eyes tracking every movement inside the chamber with unwavering vigilance. Across the room stood Director Thalen Rusk, the head of Winterford Security Operations. Tall, broad-shouldered, and unflinching, Thalen's silver eyebrows framed a pair of cold, penetrating eyes that missed nothing. He didn't look up at first. He was watching the surveillance footage in silence on a tablet, the flickering images mirrored faintly in his glasses. His jaw was tight. Every few seconds, his expression shifted, slightly when Brent Hallen appeared on screen, as though something bitter tugged at a memory just behind his professional facade. Jaren Voss sat nearby, hands folded, his face unreadable but resolute. Beside him were Nolan Crest, their internal surveillance officer, and the two young security recruits who had witnessed the incident. Their shoulders were stiff, eyes locked forward. No one spoke. The room carried a kind of courtroom weight, though no gavel would fall here, only decisions that echoed. Without a preamble, Thalen raised his head. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Let's begin." Darian adjusted Cairo gently, mindful not to wake him. Thalen's gaze moved to him, and for a beat, the formality cracked. Just for a moment his tone softened. "Mr. Cole," he said, "thank you for being here." Darian gave a slight nod. "I didn't come for thanks. I came because that man," he glanced toward the empty chair marked for Brent, "held my son upside down like a rag and called it humor." Thalen didn't blink. "You'll have your moment to speak." He turned first to the recruits. "Give your account." One of them, the younger of the two, Braden, if Darian remembered correctly, cleared his throat. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Sir, Officer Hallen. He said it was a test, but he was laughing. He didn't treat it like any kind of protocol. We thought it was a joke at first, but then it wasn't." The other nodded, adding, "He kept saying stuff like, 'Dads pretend to care,' and that he was just checking for overheating, but the baby was crying, screaming." Thalen's expression didn't change. "And did either of you feel empowered to intervene?" They hesitated. That hesitation said everything. "No, sir," the older recruit admitted. "He was a senior officer. We thought it would get us written up." A long pause followed. Thalen took off his glasses and set them on the table with care. "Do you know how many complaints I've read about Officer Brent Hallen in the past 2 years?" he asked, voice suddenly colder. 5, all marked as misunderstandings, all dismissed. 3 involved verbal aggression. 1 involved excessive force against a passenger's dog, and 1, he paused, looking directly at Darian, involved an infant. Darian's jaw clenched. The temperature in the room seemed to dip. "You knew?" he asked quietly. "Before today?" "I knew he was erratic," Thalen admitted, "but I didn't know how far it had gone. That's on us." Rocco stirred slightly, ears twitching. Thalen tapped the tablet again, and an image of Brent holding Cairo upside down flashed on the screen behind him. The recruits couldn't hide their discomfort. Nolan simply watched, arms folded, unmoved. Jaren broke the silence next. "We all missed it," he said, tone heavy. "But the truth's here now. We can't bury this." Thalen looked at Darian again. "You've been quiet. Tell us what happened, in your words." Darian shifted slightly, pulling Cairo closer, as though the telling itself might expose his son to more cold. "I entered the station," he began. "It was snowing hard. Brent was already watching us. He made a joke, if you could call it that, about inspecting the baby. I tried to walk away. He blocked me. Then he yanked Cairo from my arms and held him upside down like it was some kind of circus trick." He paused. His voice didn't waver, but something behind his eyes flashed. "He swung my son back and forth like a toy. My son cried like he was in pain. And Brent, he laughed, said he was testing reflexes. I gave him every chance to back off. I begged, I warned, and when I couldn't wait any longer, I gave a signal." His eyes moved down to Rocco. The K9 looked up calmly, as if acknowledging his name in silence. "Rocco neutralized the threat," Darian said. "No teeth, no attack, just a push. Trained, precise Cairo was in my arms again before Brent even hit the ground." The room stayed silent. Even the storm outside had quieted, the snow now tapping gently against the windows. Thalen leaned back, then turned toward Rocco. "This animal showed more restraint and discipline than many officers I've known in my career." Darian blinked, not expecting the praise. Rocco remained stoic, as if unaware of the compliment, or perhaps above it. "I reviewed Rocco's record," Nolan said flatly. 10 years. Ridgefall Command Infant Protection Specialization. No incidents. Not one. If anything, the dog deserves a commendation." Jaren added quietly, "The people in that corridor, every last one of them, volunteered their statements before we even asked." The recruits nodded. Thalen looked toward the door for a moment, his expression unreadable. "We're not just investigating Brent anymore," he said finally. "We're investigating ourselves. Anyone who signed off on those dismissed complaints will be reviewed. Brent didn't become a liability overnight. We made him one." He stood slowly, folding his arms behind his back. "This chamber will prepare a formal report by morning," he continued. "Effective immediately. A full inquiry is underway into Brent Hallen's conduct and Winterford's oversight failures. You will all be contacted for testimony." Then his eyes met Darian's one last time. "You did what no one else did. You stopped him, and you showed us all what accountability looks like." Darian didn't respond. He looked down at Cairo, still sleeping, unaware of the forces he had unknowingly survived. The hearing adjourned moments later. The lights dimmed. Outside, the snow continued its gentle descent, no longer a storm, but a quiet reckoning. And Darian understood that this incident had awakened a force far larger than one reckless officer. 2 days after the incident, the headlines reached every corner of North Star County, though no names had yet been released. The language was cautious. Infant mishandled by security personnel. Retired Service K-9 intervenes during Winterford Station altercation. Inquiry launched into conduct of unnamed officer. But behind the anonymity, everyone involved knew exactly who the headlines were about. Inside his modest home on the outskirts of West Halden, Darian sat by the window with Cairo nestled against his chest, the baby's slow breathing a soft rhythm of recovery. Snow blanketed the outside world, muting the usual street noise. Rocco lay on the rug, head raised, eyes always tracking the door. The house felt warm, but the warmth did little to silence the memory of Brent's gloved hands tightening around Cairo's ankles, swinging the infant in the cold like he was an object to be tested. Darian's phone buzzed with a steady rhythm, emails, texts, social messages. Many were from parents who had seen the footage once leaked to internal channels. Though the station had not gone public, someone had spoken. A father from Seabridge wrote, "My son was pulled from my arms once. I said nothing. You didn't. Thank you." Another message came from a former Winterford employee. "Brent Hallen's been doing this for years. No one listened." The flood of validation gave Darian no pleasure. It only deepened the weight pressing on his chest. Cairo stirred slightly, and Rocco responded immediately, moving to nuzzle the baby's hand with gentle precision. Cairo giggled, a small sound, quick but powerful. It was the first real laugh since the incident. Darian's throat tightened. That sound, so simple, reminded him why he had not allowed rage to take control in that frozen moment. A knock at the door drew Darian upright. Rocco was already at the threshold before Darian stood. It was Jaron Voss, the same lieutenant who had intervened at the station. He entered with snow still on his shoulders and a digital tablet tucked beneath one arm. "I've got updates," he said plainly, "and you need to hear this in person." They sat in the kitchen, steam rising from mugs of tea Darian barely remembered brewing. Jaron placed the tablet on the table and pulled up a folder labeled Recovered Internal Logs. Brent Hallen. "You should know," Jaron began, voice low but firm. "Brent tried to delete a lot of old complaints. We found the deletion attempts in the system logs. Fortunately, Winterford keeps cold storage backups. We recovered everything." Darian narrowed his eyes, leaning forward. "How many?" 7, Jaron said. "All within the last 11 months. 3 from staff, 4 from civilians, and one from a man who said Brent mocked him after his son fell during a winter slip." Darian's jaw tightened. "That's not the worst part," Jaron continued. "One complaint, filed 6 months ago, states that Brent liked testing young dads, just to see how far he could go before they pushed back like it was a game." Darian's hand curled around his mug. The thought of Brent turning fatherhood into some sick challenge lit a different kind of fire in him, colder, deeper. He looked at Cairo, now fast asleep in his crib near the living room, and couldn't help but imagine how many other children had cried while their fathers were forced to smile or walk away for fear of retaliation. Jaron set the tablet aside and leaned forward. "We're forming a temporary oversight board to investigate further. Director Rusk is taking point. Nolan Crest is handling surveillance and internal security breaches. I'm assisting documentation and procedural reform." He hesitated. "We want you involved." Darian blinked. "Me?" "As a civilian advisor," Jaren said, "specifically for a program we're calling Guardian Line, a new initiative to rewrite conduct protocols around infants, children, and family safety during transit and inspection. Your perspective, it matters. And frankly, Rocco's role in all this? We want him too." Darian glanced down. Rocco sat at his side, watching them both, posture alert but calm, a quiet pillar of protection. It made sense. Rocco wasn't just a symbol. He had followed his training with surgical precision and never escalated when he didn't need to. That level of discipline could save lives. Jaren pulled out a small folder and opened it to show a preliminary sketch, a flowchart of new training sequences for service animals and human personnel alike. At the bottom, printed in bold, were the words, "Rocco Protocol, Controlled Response, Maximum Safety." The room fell quiet as the snow outside pressed gently against the windows. Darian looked around his home, the baby toys near the couch, the worn collar of Rocco's first harness hanging near the door, and the blanket Kiro now slept under, the one his father had stitched years ago before passing. The threads of the past, the crisis of the present, and the responsibility of the future all wove together in that moment. He nodded slowly. "I'll do it." Jaren smiled faintly and stood to leave, pausing only to place the folder on the table. "You're not just fixing what happened to you. You're helping prevent what almost happened to someone else." As the door closed behind him, Darian stood silently in the fading light of the room. Outside, the snow still fell, but now with less urgency. Cairo slept on. Rocco lay by the door again, one ear twitching at every gust of wind. Ever vigilant, Darian didn't feel victorious. He felt resolved that the storm might one day return, but it would never catch him unprepared again. And slowly, the fear of what happened turned into the resolve to ensure it would never happen again. The moment Rocco barked once, the crowd hushed into a reverent silence, as if the single sharp sound had carried all the weight of what had been endured and overcome. Darian stood just beside the newly unveiled plaque etched with the words, "Guardian Line," in honor of restraint, holding Cairo tightly against his chest. The baby's small coat, deep navy trimmed with slate gray, matched Rocco's new harness, forming a quiet visual bond between child and protector. Snowflakes fluttered like soft confetti outside the frosted windows of the newly upgraded Winterford Station security wing. Inside, the air was warm but thick with emotion. Director Thalen Rusk, tall and composed, stood behind the podium, his fingers resting on the edges as he scanned the gathered crowd. His voice echoed with gravity. "Today is not just a reopening. It's an acknowledgement of failure, of accountability, and of what comes next." His silver eyebrows twitched slightly as he turned toward Darian and added, "This system failed to protect a child because it failed to check its own culture. That ends now." Applause followed, but it wasn't loud. It was respectful. Beside Thalen stood Lieutenant Jaren Voss, newly promoted to training supervisor. The weight of the last month sat visibly in his shoulders, but so did a newfound clarity. He nodded subtly toward Darian, a gesture of respect earned through truth rather than title. On the opposite side stood Nolan Crest, expression unreadable, arms crossed behind his back as he took in every detail like a man already cataloging future improvements. Behind them, mounted monitors looped a silent visual of training footage from the new protocol, handlers moving in snow-simulated environments, dogs being trained to respond with restraint, to intercept threats not with teeth but with judgment. In the center of it all sat Rocco, positioned on a raised platform lined with non-slip rubber, wearing his honorary badge, a round silver medallion etched with the Guardian Line crest, a shield, a paw, and a child's hand. Darian stepped forward when prompted, not as a speaker, but as a presence. He didn't need to say much. His story had already been told in hearings, in review boards, and in the quiet resilience of a father who refused to let silence follow injustice. Still, Thalen approached him directly during the recess. "You didn't just stop a moment of danger," Thalen said, voice lowered. "You exposed a crack that was years deep." Darian glanced down at Cairo, who blinked drowsily, resting his cheek against his father's chest. "Then let's make sure nothing falls through it again." Thalen nodded, placing a hand briefly on Darian's shoulder before returning to the press line. As the crowd filtered toward the exhibits lining the renovated hall, interactive stations demonstrating non-lethal intervention protocols, thermal camera simulations, and a panel tribute to past K-9s, 2 new recruits approached Darian cautiously. Both were young men, both visibly nervous. One held out a hand. "Sir, just wanted to say, what you did, it changed how we see this job." Darian shook it, watching their sincerity. "Then keep changing it. Don't wait for another Rocco to show you where the line is." Not far from them, Rocco trotted calmly toward Cairo, sitting at Darian's side and gently resting his chin against the baby's dangling foot. The boy giggled, a sound light and full of life, piercing through the institutional solemnity like sunlight cracking ice. Camera shutters clicked, reporters murmured about the symbolism. But Darian wasn't focused on that. He was watching Cairo's eyes light up at Rocco, watching the way Rocco remained alert but peaceful, as if sensing his purpose had been fulfilled. Later, Thalen returned to the microphone. "We named this final module the Rocco Protocol. Not because of what this dog did, but because of what he didn't do. He didn't escalate. He didn't react in fear. He chose protection over aggression, and that, in today's world, is the highest form of strength." The applause this time swelled with energy. Reporters stood. Officers nodded. Recruits watched with a mixture of awe and respect. As the final words of the ceremony were spoken and the crowd began to disperse, Darian turned toward the doors, snow visible beyond the glass. He adjusted Cairo's coat hood and gave Rocco a soft pat on the back. They walked together, man, child, and dog, toward the exit. The cold met them gently this time. The wind no longer howled in protest. It whispered closure, and as Darian stepped into the snow with Cairo and Rocco beside him, he knew the winter had finally given way to something brighter. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores racism, disrespect, and the moment accountability replaces cruelty. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, justice, and treating every family, especially children, with dignity and respect.